Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. I'd like to welcome you to the MuseScore Café. So this is my regular weekly series where we talk about some aspect of using MuseScore to make music. And I usually have some theme that we work from and talk about things relating to that theme. Before we get into today's episode, I want to again point to the pinned link at the top of the chat there, where you can follow. I'm checking the chat here, you can check out all my online courses, the online course, Mastering MuseScore, complete online course for learning everything about using MuseScore, as well as my music theory courses and other things. And by all means, also check out the community where you can engage in conversation about all these sorts of things. Lots of wonderful resources to take advantage of. So last week, we looked at how to shrink a score down. We were looking at this big Brahms symphony, and we kind of shrunk it down from almost 100 pages to like 20 something, which was great. Today, we're going to look at what's involved in formatting of parts, and that could mean shrinking them down. It could actually mean making them take more pages, but having the page breaks happen in more intelligent places. Could mean all sorts of things. So we're going to talk about the formatting of parts, and in particular, we're going to use that particular example of that Brahms symphony. So I have that Brahms symphony loaded up here, and I have it back in its original form because I want to make a point about generating parts. When you generate parts from a score, it's going to inherit all of the style settings of that score, except for a couple. So let's talk about that first. So when I say all of the style settings, let's think about what's going on in this score here. This score, as it's set up, I've reset all those changes I made before. So it's back to the page size and staff size that we started off with. Come on. Hello. Okay. Gonna be one of those. All right. And it looks like MuseScore has locked up, so I will just restart it and not worry about that. Hopefully everything else is okay here. MuseScore hopefully coming back. Uh-oh. Not a good sign. All right. Bear with me. No problem. No panic. No panic at all. I just restart my Linux system and back to business as usual. Nothing to see here. We will be back with you momentarily. So yes, the point that I want to make is that when you generate your parts from the score, it is going to inherit most of your style settings. The only things that it resets are the actual page and staff size and a couple of specific other settings. Let's say yes. I usually say no to restore the previous session, just because I don't fully trust it, I guess. I don't know, but it's fine. And it gets me right back where I was. So hopefully this time when I click format, we actually get the page settings dialog. Come on. There we go. So as we can see, it's using legal size paper, which those of you in the United States will probably recognize. That's a long sheet of paper, like longer than a standard letter size. I don't know if there's a metric or whatever the not US page sizes. I don't know if there's an equivalent for that in like A4, A5, B3, all those different things. Letter is similar to A4. Legal is taller. So anyhow, that was to fit everything in there. And it has this particular staff space size of 1.764, which was the default. And I went ahead and changed it to just 1 so that things, we had a better chance of being able to fit multiple systems per page. And then, as you may remember, I made other changes that actually made that work. Like I went to Format, Style, and on Page, I turned on Enable Vertical Justification. And bingo, that right there allowed 2 systems to fit on most of these pages. And it very quickly got me down to way fewer pages. So now when I go to generate parts, I'm going to go File, Parts. And I'm just going to say all parts. That's the easiest thing to do. It's going to automatically create a part for all of your instruments. And when I hit OK, what we're going to see is that if I go to visit a part, like say the flute part here, first of all, we see that it's got this weird extra title page thingy that we probably don't want. And I'll talk about maybe how to deal with that. If I now go to Format Page Settings, we'll see it's back to the default page size, which for me is letter. And the staff space, even though in the score I made it tiny, it is 1.75, which is the default. So those 2 things, page size and staff space, MuseScore will automatically choose a default for your pages and not just copy them from the score. The 2 other things that it will not just copy from the score is the setting of concert pitch. Because maybe you like to work with your score in concert pitch. I certainly do while I'm composing. But you don't want your parts in concert pitch. You want your parts transposed. So even if your score was set to concert pitch, your parts will default to having concert pitch off. The other thing is your score is normally set not to use multi-measure rests. Your part will have multi-measure rests enabled by default. I think those are the only differences. There might be some other obscure settings somewhere else, but those are the ones that I remember that are going to be different by default. So, yeah, and you're right, Dave, that I'm asking for trouble a little bit here, but I think I'm okay. I think that lockup was just a fluke. That just happens sometimes, where right when I start something and I go to bring up a dialogue, that just locks up, and it doesn't seem to be dependent on the size of the score. But this particular system is powerful enough that I'm not anticipating processor or memory related problems, just other flukes. So this part here is already, just to look at it, it's pretty decent. So one of the things, and when I say it's pretty decent, I mean there's a lot of things about this part that are, they look, just to visually gaze at this, I don't see a ton of terrible collisions and things. There's plenty of things that I might want to fix up, might want to customize, might want to tweak, but it doesn't look absolutely terrible. Now, one thing I'm going to do right now is I'm going to switch to my editing workspace that I've created, and I've showed you how to create that and other things. That gives me a little more vertical room to work with. It condenses my toolbar down to just a single row instead of 2, and it made some other changes. So it just gives me a little more room to work with. I'm probably not going to be using the palettes a whole lot here, so I'm going to close them for now. But I am going to be using the inspector, so I will leave that open for now. So the first thing I guess that I do need to talk about is this whole title frame business. So the thing is that, yeah, unfortunately, MuseScore does not have a sense of being able to create a separate title frame for the score versus the parts. But it does. So like in the score, the person who created it had done something to make that frame a separate page. But you notice it's no longer the case now. Now that I enabled justification and made these changes to the staff size, it was able to actually fit the first system on the first page. So in order to make this a separate page in the score, instead of just sizing the frame just barely big enough, I should select that frame and hit Control-Enter to add a page break to it. Now, there's a page break. So that is a separate page. So now we have our title frame. Now, on the flute part, we don't want a separate page, probably. If I do, I could do the same thing. I could just select that and hit Control-Enter, and now I have a separate page. But my guess is you don't want that. You don't want the fancy title pages. So let me show you how to kind of work around this. This picture, if I delete it right now, if I just delete it, now when I go back to the score, you'll see it is still there in the score. I didn't actually know if that was going to be the case or not. I was totally expecting that the picture would have disappeared from the score, and I don't trust it. I don't trust. I think that if I save the score and reload it, there's a chance that that picture is going to go away. So instead of deleting the picture, let me undo that. I would consider pressing V to make it invisible, except that apparently I have to select it. Okay, there it is, V. Apparently you can't make pictures invisible. So I was better off doing it the way I did it before. Let me undo any other changes I've done. Oops. So here we are. I'm going to select that picture and delete it. And I guess that's how we're going to do it. What I would say about these title pages is, as fun as they are to have, I would personally recommend adding them separately. If you're trying to do anything fancy and then in the score and then you don't want it in the parts, the easiest thing to do is just make that title page as a separate file in a program that's dedicated to that kind of thing, and then combine it with the score in a PDF editor or something like that. That's personally what I would recommend. It's, I think, the easier way to go. Meanwhile, I'm going to just flip over here and check. Is there a difference between OK and apply is a question. So this is a standard thing. It's not just a MuseScore thing. Apply means do the thing, but leave the dialog open. OK means do the thing and close it. So you never have to hit them both. Apply does the thing that is in the dialog and leaves the dialog open. OK does the thing that the dialog is doing and close the dialog. Again, every single computer program works that same way. Those are standardized buttons across all programs. Okay, so I'm just deleting that image. And in deleting that image, it looks like when I did that, it automatically resized the frame, because I think the frame was sizing itself for the picture. Yeah, apparently so. So I'm still not totally sure what's going on with that, but I'm continuing to undo things that I'm doing while testing, and I'm trying to get back to the place where I have all my parts, but I haven't made any other changes. So again, I'm going to re-add my page break to the score. I'm going to come back to the part and just delete that image. So this is now, if you didn't do anything fancy with images, this is more what your score will what your part will normally look like. Now, this particular one does something that's not typical. We wouldn't normally see the staff name on every system here. And that's only there because the original score had set a style, format, style. It had set this option here on the score page that says, it had turned off the option that says hide instrument name if there is only one instrument. This option is normally enabled. So whoever created this score for some reason disabled that option. It really could have just been turned on because it's not relevant for the score, but it is relevant for the parts. And if you look at all the parts are going to have that same option set, because at the moment when I created the parts, that option was set, or I should say that option was not set. So here's a case where I want to do what I talked about in the newsletter. I'm in one of my parts going to go to Style, and I'm going to turn on that option, Hide Instrument Name if there's only one instrument. And now I'm going to click this button that says Apply to All Parts. Now, if I don't do that, let's see what happens. here's the clarinet part, and you see there's no staff names. But if I go to the oboe, there is staff names, right? So what I really want to do is come here to Format, Style, and hit that button that says Apply to All Parts. When I do that, and then hit OK to close the dialog. Come on, close dialog. There we go. It takes a minute to apply to all those parts. So that's my system not really handling a 100-page score and all the parts. It just meant waiting a few seconds to close that dialog after applying to all parts. I can handle that. But now we'll see those staff names are gone everywhere. So that's great, right? So we have now, what I want. So I want to go to the violin one part because that's the one that I actually am going to be fiddling with here. And I'm shrinking this down now to the point where it fits on the page, and now where the page fits on screen, and I want to kind of scroll and see what I got here. Because I looked at the flute part before, I haven't looked at the violin part. So the very first thing that I see is, this one system left over on the last page. Now, your first inclination might be, oh, what could I do to get that system onto the last page? But I'm going to say that is not the first thing you want to do, because that's not actually the most important thing to be thinking about right now. I want to think about where the page breaks are, where the line breaks are, because, for instance, right here on the first page, we're playing these double stops. Blank, 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 and then on the next page, blank, 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 blank. I don't want to have to turn the page in the middle of that. Both my hands are busy as a violin player. Not that I play violin. That is not the place where I want that page break to happen. So what I'm going to do is kind of look around to see if there's a better place. And boy, I see, hey, here's 2 measures of rest. Is there anything I could do to get this system onto the previous page? And yes, there's going to turn out to be quite a few things that I can do. So, I'm going to be thinking about that. How can I get the page breaks to be in reasonable places? I'm also going to think about the overall spacing. Like, this is the default spacing. You might remember last week I condensed the spacing, got the notes as squished together as possible, and then when it generated parts, they were unreadable because they were so squished together. I'm now back to the default spacing, and I think this is pretty good as default spacing goes. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to check in the chat because I see there's some more comments here. Could I resize the picture? Yes, I could have resized the picture. Absolutely. So the repeats that involve page breaks. There's all sorts of reasons to want to optimize your page breaks. So my task here isn't necessarily to teach you how to be an expert music engraver, in part because I'm not an expert music engraver. I know some things, but I'm not an expert. What I am going to do is I'm going to flip over to IMSLP, where at one point I successfully, right here, I click the parts tab here. So I'm on the page for this score on IMSLP, and I discover that I can view the parts that were actually published. And so I want to look at how the actual published edition did this. So I got to look at what I'm doing here. Parts, flute 1. Where's the thing? There's a button to see all the rest of the parts because I'm missing most of the parts. Why am I not seeing all the parts? Is it, I had them, I know they're there. I know they are here because I did look at them. Parts. There's a purchase option. That's not what I'm looking for. Scores 17 parts. Complete. I know there was something that I saw, but if I have to just look at the flute instead, that's what I will do. It is so odd, though, because there were more parts before. And I'm not seeing them. Oh, there's the 23 more. There we go. I knew I saw this. 23 more. So, violins 1. So when I click on this and view it here, I'm going to get to see how someone who knows what they're doing, supposedly, decided on where the page breaks go. So this is an edition that put page breaks. And notice they did exactly that thing that I talked about. Here's the spot where the double stops were, but here's where they put the page break. And they managed to get the page break somewhere where there's a rest, right? So, so what I want to do is figure out what's involved. So the first thing I want to do is just look at how many systems they're fitting on the page. Oh, by the way, their page here is probably bigger than my page. There's probably a way for me to find out the properties on this, what the is copy link tools somewhere. I don't know. There's somewhere in here, I'm sure there's a thing that will tell me what this page size is. But typically, orchestra parts are not printed on letter size paper. It's not tall enough. It's not big enough. It's printed on slightly bigger paper. It's bigger than A4. It's about the height of A4, but wider is the typical size. But rather than just do that, I want to show you some of it. So I could pick a bigger page size. I could pick 9 by 12 inches and do that. In fact, maybe I will do that. If I just go to Format, Page Settings, and instead of letter, I don't know if 9 by 12 is even an option. Oh, 9 by 12 is an option. So that's a common size. And I'm going to say Apply to all parts. All right. So now I have 9 by 12 paper. Great. But it's still the case that my page break is not right where the rest is. In fact, it's now I've got too much on this page. So there you go. So 9 by 12 paper is a good paper size for at least U.S. people. People in other countries, you might have to find out what the common recommendation is for your region of the world. But this, if I want to count now how many systems are on this page, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 systems on that page. The original has, I believe, only 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So they only have 9 systems on that first page, whereas I have 10. So I could try to change settings to force all the pages to have more room on them, but I don't think that's what I want to do. I'm just going to add page breaks. Now, you can totally do that. You can totally change settings to get 9 pages per page. But realistically, that's not necessarily the right answer. And when I say you can change settings, what I mean is I could change the minimum system distance. Like right now, it's letting systems be closer together than is maybe a good idea. This system here, starting at measure 50, and this measure starting at measure 60, are perhaps closer together than they should be. If you look at the published edition, these systems are more widely spaced. So yes, I could just increase the minimum system distance, but I'm not going to trust that that's what I want. I just want to add page breaks where I want them. So that's the typical thing that I recommend doing. But if I did want to change that, I would go to Format, Style, and then under Page, here are all these settings for minimum system distance, maximum system distance. The thing is, when you're using the Enable Vertical Justification of Staves setting, these settings don't work the way you might expect. It's really a bug that's fixed in MuseScore 4. But the other thing is, this option here that says Enable Vertical Justification of Staves, it only makes sense for the score. That's the thing that enables the staves of a score to spread themselves out, compress as necessary. But the parts don't need this option. The parts just don't need that option at all, because there's only one staff per system. This option is about spreading the staves within a system, not spreading the systems on a page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable that option and then hit apply to all parts again. So I would recommend disabling that option for your parts, because that's going to give you a little more control over these things. Now, notice this minimum system distance has the reset button enabled. The person who created this score apparently customized the settings to use a greater than normal staff distance and minimum system distance. I don't want any of that. I'm going to reset that, and I'm going to reset this back to their defaults. And hit apply to all parts. Probably I should hit just reset all my styles to default, but I'm not going to. So again, that's going to take a few seconds. And meanwhile, I check. If you're going to print your score, it needs to be A4. So an orchestra score on A4 is way too small. Orchestra scores on A4, well, I shouldn't say way too small, but a professional conductor works from a larger paper than A4. In the United States, it could be tabloid size, which is 11 by 17. I think that's A3-ish. So orchestra scores are printed bigger than letter or A4. Parts are printed on something that, as I said, is similar to A4, but at least in the United States, it's wider than A4. So I guess I don't know. Maybe in Europe they literally use A4, but in the United States it's typically bigger than A4. But definitely you don't want smaller. So for piano and organ, yeah, unfortunately for those parts, you might well want to leave the vertical justification enabled and then do other things. So we'll deal with piano scores some other time and the stuff that's true for that. But yeah, for at least these single instrument parts, we're going to disable that option. It's not the end of the world to disable it for piano parts. It just means that the two staves of the piano part won't be able to stretch to fill space. It'll only stretch to avoid collisions, and so the spacing won't be ideal for piano. But if you leave it enabled, then you just do other things, and I'll deal with piano formatting in another episode. But I actually have talked about that some before. All right, now that I've made those settings, now let's look at where my page breaks are. So I changed the justification and the staff and system spacing. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I still have 10 systems on this page. So what I will want to do is put a page break where I want the page break. And probably, since I have a professionally edited part to work from, I might just copy their breaks. So let's see where they are. The line break he has here is right before that run of 16ths. Well, that's where it showed up by default. MuseScore isn't smart about this. It just fits as much as it can. A professional engraver will be smart and try to put line breaks also at places that don't involve having to scan from one end of one line to the beginning of the next at an awkward place. But what constitutes awkward? Well, if it's all on the same page, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, there are places where possible, we try to keep measures together. If it's a complex chromatic fast passage, then it's better to keep those two measures together. And probably this editor has done that. So the next system starts where the return to arco is, and that looks like that's the case here. The third system is in the middle of all this chromatic stuff, and then measure 18. So it looks like that's a little different. My third system starts with 19. So I'm just going to add a break where he put his break. I select something and hit enter. The next measure is actually right in the middle of those 16ths, right? What I said you don't generally do, but whatever, he did it. And because probably the spacing would have looked weird if he had tried to move this measure to the next system or move that measure to the previous system. So that's all well and good. The next system ends with the multi-measure break. So I'm going to make mine end with the multi-measure rest. The next system ends with the tie into measure 45. So I'm going to end mine with the tie into 45. And then the next one ends with that tie into 55. So that's already the case. Tie into 55. The next system ends with this Pew F. Where did that go? Oh, his says forte. So, but same thing. And then finally, the last system ends the third measure of letter B, and it looks like this person hasn't put a rehearsal mark on this, but I can see that it's basically where the rests start. So it's the third measure where the rests start. So 1, 2, 3 is where he puts his. So when I do that, I have my breaks in the right place, but I haven't finished the page. So now I'm going to actually add a page break there. And that then gets my first page looking more or less identical to his first page in terms of where all the breaks are. I mean, it's definitely identical in terms of where the breaks are. But there's some other optimizations that I want to do here. So A4 is 8.28 by 11.693. So yeah, that 8 inches is that's less than 9, right? And this is both smaller than 9 by 12. So if A4 is smaller than 9 by 12, if that's what they use in Europe and elsewhere, then great. But in the United States, A4 paper isn't available, and it's not a common size to cut to either. 9 by 12 is, and so it's just a little bigger. Okay, so if you're printing off your own parts, though, in the United States, you just use letter and deal with it. So that's what's common. So do let me know if there's anything in particular that comes up from here that is, that I haven't addressed. I do see a paper here, a question about legal. The problem with legal is it's actually not very friendly in that it's too tall. It tends to curl over the top of a stand, and just it doesn't stand of its own accord on a music stand very well. It's an awkward size. It's 8.5 by 14. It's just too tall. It's also awkward to turn the pages on. So sometimes you see people use it, like the person who produced that score used it for the score, but it's not really recommended for this kind of stuff because it doesn't stand very well. So anyhow, that's my observation about legal. When I've tried to use legal paper, I've regretted it for this kind of thing. So if I now look at this first page, I have it looking the way I wanted. By the way, let's see how many pages the actual professional version is. It's got 1 page, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's the end of the movement. 5 pages for that movement. My version here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 extra system, or 2 extra systems. So you can see that even though on the first page I actually had to kick some stuff off to match theirs, for the other systems I'm going to have to compress them a little bit more. So I'm going to do that. And in fact, let's look at the next page then and see what the professional did for the next page. His version goes to measure 73, basically. Let's see what my version does here. And I say my version, that's the start. I'm reading wrong here. The second page starts on 73 and goes to 176. And mine goes actually well past 176, right? There's 178, there's 177. So if I put a page break right here, I've now matched his second page. But somewhere he's managed to make up the difference. Somewhere he's able to fit more systems. Like right here, I can see this looks like a lot of systems. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 systems on page 4. Yeah, so he's actually squeezed a lot of stuff onto that page. So let's talk about how you're going to do it. I'm not going to try to match his stuff exactly right now. I want to talk about some strategies for compressing things. What I want to do is I want to eliminate the things that are preventing MuseScore from doing that automatically. I'm going to assume if I go to Format, Style, Page, and then take that minimum system distance, and if I just make it smaller, I can make it as small as I want, but let me make it that small. MuseScore still not going to, well, it does, because it actually did manage to fit a lot of systems on a page. But I'm not convinced I want to go that small. What I want to do is I want to give MuseScore a fighting chance. And so that's what I want to show you. So yes, you can reduce minimum system distance, and then MuseScore will fit more systems. But I want to show you other things to be thinking about. I want to look for the places that are preventing it, like right here. What the heck is going on here? There's a dynamic marking and a hairpin below that. Well, that's because whoever added this was probably using an earlier version of MuseScore that didn't handle this stuff right, or he didn't attach this right. This mezzo forte should be attached to the note itself here. And if I do that, you'll see that this hairpin automatically shortened itself. So now it's not as tall there. I'm just looking for places where that kind of stuff is going on. Here's another place. This hairpin here is attached incorrectly. It should only go up to, but not all the way there. So I'm selecting this and I'm using Shift right, Shift left to change the endpoint of that hairpin to end before the dynamic. I'm looking for places where this kind of stuff is going on. Now look here. I have a fortissimo, and I have this note way, way, way above the staff. Now, I don't know that this is where, if I start thinking about where my line breaks happen, this might not be where that happens. In fact, let me look at the professional version here, page 2. Professional version, page 2. Yeah, that's not the case at all, right? His forte is not lined up with that high note, and so it doesn't have that problem. And that's because why is that? Because he's got wait a minute. Oh, there's a fortissimo that's missing. That's what am I looking at here? Oh my gosh, this fortissimo doesn't belong on that note. That fortissimo belongs on the high note. And so for some reason, this fortissimo here, let me reset its position with Control R. He had flipped it above the staff, and probably he did that in the score to avoid a collision somewhere else, but it was clearly the wrong answer. So that turned out to be what I needed to do here. But that sort of thing, like here's a case where the piano marking here is kind of colliding. It's not colliding. MuseScore is adding space to avoid the collision, but it shouldn't have needed to. Or I shouldn't say it shouldn't have needed to. We can help it. If I just take that piano marking and I'm going to use Control left arrow to move it sideways, now there's room for MuseScore to close up that space. It didn't, because I put in a page break there. But had I not put in a page break there, MuseScore would have taken advantage of that to close up that space. So often there are little things you can do like that. Look for places where there's like a stack of things between staves and reposition things horizontally to allow MuseScore to do its job better. So here we go. So I'm going to look just for other places to see if I can see something like that. There was one on the first page originally, but I'm going to see if I have any others here to look at. Well, let me go back to the first page. It was stuff like, well, let me go to a part that I haven't formatted yet. I don't want to undo all my changes, but this forte here used to be right on top of I think it was right on top of that arco. Before I started messing with things, this fortissimo was right on top of that arco. And so I would have moved them around so that it didn't create all that extra space, right? If this arco had been here, notice how MuseScore had to add extra space to make room for it. Now, there's also a question, why is that arco so high above the staff? I feel like the person who did this might have done that to make sense for something in the score, but this is too high. I don't think that's the default position for this staff text, but in any case, I am going to override it. I'm going to move that pizzicato down some. So instead of 4 staff spaces above, I'm going to move it so it's only 3 staff spaces above, and then I'm going to hit set as style so that all those staff texts move down a little closer. Also, subjectively, yes, this fortissimo followed by piano, okay, fine, but that looks kind of ugly to me. And I want to see how the professional guy did it here. So that was back to the first page. So first of all, it's only F, not FF, and he just has them further apart. It's a little more spacious. And so I want this to be more spacious. And that's because, boy, he has set that dynamic marking to be very low below that staff. And there's no reason for it. That's too low. So that's not the default in MuseScore. I'm going to use the inspector to reduce that down to, say, 3, maybe even 2.5, and then hit set as style so that all the dynamics move. And while I'm at it, I'm going to do the same for hairpins. I'm going to move hairpins to not 2.5, because 2.5, I did this one at 2.5. I don't know if you can tell that, but let me add a hairpin right here. If I add a hairpin here, 2.5. Well, MuseScore is automatically aligning these, but notice it had to move the hairpin it had to move the dynamic to do it. I get the point that I want to make, and I'm not making any sense here, is that hairpins align to their center, dynamics align to their bottom, and they're half a staff space different. So if I want my hairpins to be at the same height as the dynamics, I have to make them. I have to make the setting be half a staff space different. So if I want this to align, there actually it looks pretty aligned. So this is 2.5. This is 2.5. Well, okay, maybe I'm lying. I don't know. Maybe we changed something and I'm not remembering it. So anyhow, I'm fiddling with this stuff, and let me come back to the chat, see if there's any other interesting comments in here. Yeah, just more talking about printers and pages, and someone else noticing about that the fortissimo being below. Now, it's still the case that this horizontally, the FF and the P are closer together than they were in the professional version, and that's simply because he's dealing with wider. Well, is he dealing with wider paper? I guess I don't know, but the spacing is different. And MuseScore 4 is going to make some big improvements to how notes are spaced. MuseScore 3 does an okay job of spacing things, but it actually gets a number of things wrong about spacing. And let me see if I can see an example in this score here. The distance between notes of the same rhythmic value should be the same from measure to measure within a system, if at all possible. And there's any number of places where MuseScore will get that wrong, where you'll have eighth notes further apart in one measure than another. Like, look at this measure here. The eighth notes are further apart in this measure than they are in this measure. And it has to do with the placement of the accidentals. And sometimes that's correct. But MuseScore is way, way, way too aggressive about that, and will let one accidental in a measure totally mess up the spacing for that measure. And it shouldn't. And MuseScore 4 is going to completely fix that. It's actually quite amazing, and I look forward to Bill showing that off. So this process that I'm going through, you might be looking at this and going, wow, he's all over the place here. Yeah, unfortunately, the things that need to be done to fix things up in a score are different from score to score. And so it's not the case that there's a one-size-fits-all solution. But it's all about first figuring out where you want your page and line breaks to be. And the reason I say that's what you want to do first is, like, look at what's happening here. This fortissimo that's sitting on top of that note there. Here's another one of those cases where if I move that fortissimo off to the side, notice how MuseScore was able to close up the space a little bit. So yeah, I might want to do that sort of thing. But I only want to do it if I know that this note is directly above that note. So I don't want to make those adjustments before I figure out where my line breaks go. I need to figure out my line breaks first, because they are going to determine so much about how I want to manually position things like that. A lot of the manual positioning, because if I had put, let me reset the position of this. If I had put this line break, say, right here, notice now that fortissimo isn't colliding with anything. And now there's no reason for me to have moved it. So you need to first figure out line breaks and page breaks before you get hung up about this manual positioning stuff. And then often, if you do that in a way where you've got plenty of vertical space between systems, you might not have to do, like, maybe it's not a problem. Like, there's not actually a problem. Yes, there's a little extra space between these two staves to accommodate that fortissimo. Is it a problem? No, not really. It just makes that spacing a little uneven. If I move it off to the side, MuseScore is able to close up that space and increase the space everywhere else to make up for it. It's a little more even spacing. Is it better? I don't know. That's up to you. So figuring out line and page breaks first is, I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to figure that kind of stuff out before obsessing about other details, because the other details are so dependent on where your breaks actually are. Cool. I'm still looking at comments here and seeing if there's anything else that I'm missing. I see some nice discussion there, so I'd love to see that. So these things that I'm doing are all good. Now let's imagine that there is some place where I decided I really like these measures here. Let's say that I've already decided I want a line break there after that crescendo, decrescendo, that those two measures belong together, and I want a line break there. But let's say that I've decided, you know what, I really want this measure to fit on the previous system, and then the measure rest to start the next system. Let's say that that's what I wanted to do. Well, I would select 105 to 113, select the measures that I want to have together, and I'm going to see if I can squish them together using the reduce stretch command. So it's format, stretch, decrease, layout, stretch. It's left curly brace. Left curly brace will try to compress the spacing, and you might have to do that a few notches to see if you can get it to fit. It might work, or it might be that it's just not going to fit without me changing other settings, but I'm going to give it a shot. Compress, there we go. Compress did the job. Now here's a little pro tip for you. I compressed it one notch and it fit, but I don't trust that. I don't trust math. I don't trust floating point math. I trust integer math. I don't trust floating point math. Floating point math basically is decimals. And yes, it fits right now, but the calculation that made that fit is floating point math. And sometimes it happens that you save a score and you reload it, or you load it on another system, and suddenly that measure doesn't fit anymore. So here's what I like to do. Anytime I've had to reduce stretch to make something fit, I reduce stretch another notch and then hit enter to lock in that break. Oops, I didn't mean to lock it in. I didn't mean to hit enter with the whole thing selected. I want to do it with just that measure selected, because otherwise it undid my other break. So that kind of locked in that stretch reduction. So stretch reduction will, in many cases, allow you to squeeze an extra measure onto a system, but you can't you can't get too carried away with it. Like, there is no way, no amount of stretch is going to allow all of this to fit on one system. I can stretch until I'm blue in the face, and that's as much as it's like, I'm sorry, that's as far as you can go. If I wanted to fit more measures than that onto that system, I'm going to have to change one of those other settings that we looked at before. I'll have to go to Format, Style, Measure. And these are settings that we looked at last week, so you can review last week's session for help with these settings. But I would reduce the minimum measure width. I would reduce the margins for next to the clef. I would reduce the minimum note distance. All of these are settings that I can reduce further to allow things to compress. Now, when I do that, it's going to affect the whole score, not just this system. So all this work that I just did to get this page looking the way I want to protect it. So what I want to do is I want to lock in those breaks, right? My first system broke in the right place naturally, but as soon as I reduce minimum note distance, it might try to squeeze another measure. I don't want it to. So I'm going to lock that in with a line break. Well, there's a good way, an easy way of doing this. I can select everything on that first page and then go to Format, Add, Remove System Breaks. And I don't want to do it every 4 measures. This is something I use a lot for lead sheets. But what I want to do is say, add system break at end of each system. This basically takes all the places where there's not an explicit line break, but that's just where the line happens to break, and it will add an explicit break there. So it's a nice little feature. It just added in that explicit line break for me that wasn't there before. Undo it, and you can see there wasn't an explicit line break there. That's just where it happened to be. Redo, that line break comes back. It preserved the page break and all the other breaks that were already there. It just added new ones. So now I can fiddle with minimum note distance and not screw up my first page. So I can reduce minimum note distance as much as I want. I can go to Format, Style, Measure, reduce minimum note distance down to 0.2 or whatever. And now MuseScore's fitting more measures lots of other places because of it, but it didn't mess up my first page. So when I say that there's an art to this, unfortunately, the science part of it is just knowing, how to fix the problems, but recognizing the problems, like recognizing that this forte here, let me reset it again, that forte was causing a problem there. That's just looking to see where MuseScore's adding extra space and why. And then you just figure out what you want to do. By the way, don't move the dynamic to the right to fix the problem, because then it looks like the fortissimo happens after that note, and it doesn't. It happens on the note. So it's always safe to move it to the left. Just don't move it so far to the left that it looks like it starts on the previous note. But here we're safe because there is no previous note, right? And that's often the case actually here. So, so what about edits and parts going back to the main score? So no, none of this is going to happen, nor should it, because that particular adjustment that I just made, let's think about this. This adjustment is to the fortissimo in measure, I'm going to look at the status bar here, that's measure 41. So let's look at that. That's the fortissimo in measure 41. Let's go back to the main score. The main score, I'll go to measure 41 with Control F. Except I should do it while zoomed. So here's measure 41. And let's go down here. I said it wasn't going to be there, and yet it looks like it is. And that should not have been the case. And so I'm either a liar or he had made that adjustment himself. And that's possible. It's possible he made that adjustment himself in the score to avoid this collision. But it's a different adjustment. Notice he had to move that all the way across the bar line, and in my part, it's overlapping the bar line. So I actually moved it a different out. Let me reset it here. Oops, I'm editing it. Reset it here. And now I'm going to move back to the score. See, the score still has it. This adjustment was already in the score because he wanted to save space there. So he had already moved that to save that space there. But that adjustment was needed to avoid that problem. But it's the point is, this is a different situation. The thing that's below that FF is very different from the thing that's below the FF here. So the manual adjustments that are needed in the score are very often not needed in the parts, and vice versa. In fact, if I go back to the score, maybe I'll find other places. Here's another. Okay, so here's a place where he made that adjustment to the. Oh gosh, that's because there's ledger lines crazy below the staff, and that's probably going to be a problem everywhere. But yeah, you'll just find that the stuff that's below something in the score is not what's below it in the part. So if you're making adjustments based on trying to save space between systems, the adjustments in the score are not the adjustments in the part. So MuseScore knows this and keeps those adjustments independent. Now, if I change the actual dynamic, if I change this from FF to say just a forte, and yes, if I want it to affect playback, I'll have to mess with the inspector, but I'm not going to bother. I just changed it to forte here. Now I go to the violin part. You'll see it did make that change. Things that need to be synchronized are synchronized. Things that shouldn't be aren't. Plenty of gray area, things that maybe sometimes should be, sometimes shouldn't be, and we tend to side on err on the side of caution, so that if we think sometimes they should be synchronized and sometimes they shouldn't, we don't synchronize it. So that way you can just synchronize it manually, make the same adjustment in both places. Whereas if we synchronize it automatically, it'd be really difficult to break that synchronization. Eventually, we'll want to add a feature to do that so that we can just let certain settings be synchronized, and then you can break them on command. I would love to see that. It was one of the very first feature requests I made when I started using MuseScore 12 years ago, and still waiting for that to happen. But someday I have faith that it will. All right. So Dave, that's what I'm saying. Anything that involves something that should be synchronized, like changing notes or changing the content of text, is synchronized. But the position of things, formatting of things is not synchronized, nor should it be. Because things like adding system breaks, the parts, where I add a system break in a part doesn't reflect on where the system break should be in the score, and vice versa. Anything having to do with formatting is generally maintained independently. All right, so there are tons of things that one could talk about as far as the formatting of the part, but every score tells you its own things, and I told you the things that I wanted to tell you here. If I look at this now and say, well, gee, it's 5 pages plus 2 systems there, I'm going to tell you something. So the original version was only 5 pages, right? It was somehow he squeezed enough onto things that he was able to get everything done in 5 pages. And in this case, yeah, I could squeeze things down more and try to get it to 5 pages. And it would just be doing more of the same, reducing some of those minimum note distance settings, reducing, there's probably places where I can save some space between systems by looking for things like that fortissimo that was colliding with something. Here's a piano that's colliding with something. Move it off to the side. That didn't buy me anything because it was already a page break there. These hairpins here are, if I move them up higher, that'll save me a little space. Move it up a little higher, right? And move this one up a little higher. I'm always using the inspector for this to get real precise adjustments. So that'll enable some space to be saved. There's all sorts of things like that I can do to save space here and there. And in that case, it actually got me almost to fit that last system on there. And then maybe I could, do some more fiddling with compression and so forth to get it to fit. Or, hear me out, maybe 6 pages is okay. Maybe 6 pages is okay, and I'm better off just filling that last page. That's the last thing I want to show you, that sometimes you're better off not making it too crowded looking. Look how nice and spacious these first 2 pages look. Look how crowded the rest of the pages look. I don't love that. So I'm just going to put in some page breaks. I'm just going to put in a page break on this measure here. Hello. And another one on this measure here. And then another one on this measure here. And now suddenly my last page isn't so lonely. Now, is that enough? Or should I have, let's put in a few more. I got to now delete this page break, delete that one. And maybe here. So I could just play with where these breaks are so that these pages are better balanced. And then it's 6 pages, but it's 6 spacious, nicely spaced pages. So don't assume making smaller is always what you want. If you've got a certain number of pages, like 6 pages is the same number of sheets of paper as 5, right? It's 3 sheets of paper either way. But if it's a front and back situation, it does mean we have to flick that last page over. So it is one more page turn to go 6 versus 5. So that is something to consider. But not if it's that if it's that open and then an insert. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's 6. No matter how you slice it, it's an extra page turn. But in any case, be thinking about that as well. Be thinking about effective use of the pages that you actually have rather than just reduce at all costs, because sometimes reducing at all costs is not the right answer. So anyhow, that's something else to consider. So let's see. There we go. So I agree with the people saying that 6 pages could be useful. And yes, Dave, figuring out which pages are facing is also useful also. And if it starts on a facing page, then suddenly 6 is definitely no worse than 5 for sure. So absolutely, these are the kinds of things you think about when you're producing parts. It's not just how can I print it? It's, or what size paper. It's really thinking through the mechanics of where your page turns are, what the sizes are, how far apart these things are. Like a violin, think about this also. Violins are 2 people sharing a single stand. So that stand is this far. It's like arm's length and more, because you got to have room for your arm and elbow, and it's in between 2 people. You're having to read that from a further distance than, say, a flute player, where that stand can be closer to you. So I could also have thought about making the staff size smaller to fit it on 5 pages. I'd be willing to do that for the flute. I'd be less willing to do that for the violins. These are other things to think about. So in any case, I've showed you a whole lot of things. They all kind of relate to different aspects of formatting and making music readable. So hopefully, some of this was useful. If you find other questions that you have about this, I encourage you to come over to the community, post some examples. We can talk about them. We can talk about them in future episodes of this. But meanwhile, I'm going to wrap things up and get on with the rest of my day. So I want to thank everyone for being here for the MuseScore Café. These are my sessions where we do this. We dive deep into the ways of using MuseScore to do things. And so let's see, this is the 3rd week of the month. Next week is the 4th week, meaning I don't know what the topic is. This was the score of the month, where it was like looking at one score and talking about a lot of different issues, a cross-section. Next week, we'll probably go with a topic thing, where it'll be one particular topic that we explore, but I don't know what it is yet. So if people have suggestions, shoot them at me, post them to the community. That's the best place for it. And then the week after that will be an Ask Me Anything session. Sometime soon in the next few weeks, I expect to be doing a MuseScore 4 preview, because I think the public alpha release is coming within a month. It's not in the next couple of days, but it could be as soon as a week. It'll certainly be as soon as a month. I shouldn't say certainly. So I expect to be seeing me talk about MuseScore 4 really soon, because it's taking shape nicely. There's some really nice things going on in MuseScore 4 that I'm excited to be showing you. So again, thanks to everyone for being here, and I will see you all next time.